desires to become one with me. Such a devotee who is unflinchingly engaged always glorifies my pastimes and activities. Purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. There are 5 kinds of liberation stated in the scriptures. One is to become one with the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or to forsake one's individuality and forsake one's individuality and merge into the spirit, Supreme Spirit. This is called ekatmatam, becoming one with the Lord. A devotee never accepts this kind of liberation. The other 4 liberations are to be promoted to the same planet, Vaikuntha, to associate personally with the Supreme Lord, to achieve the same opulence as the Lord, and to attain the same bodily features as the Supreme Lord. A pure devotee, as will be explained by Kapila Muni, does not aspire for any of the 5 liberations. He especially despises as hellish the idea of becoming one with the Supreme Personality of God. 3. Prabodhananda Saraswati, a great devotee of Lord Chaitanya, said, Kaivalyam narakayate, the happiness of becoming one with the Supreme Lord, which is aspired for by the Mayavadis, is considered hellish. That oneness is not for pure devotees. There are many so-called devotees who think that in the conditioned state, we may worship the personality of Godhead, but that ultimately there is no personality. They say that since the absolute truth is impersonal, one can imagine a personal form of the impersonal absolute truth for the time being, but as soon as one becomes liberated, the worship stops. That is the theory put forward by the Mayavada philosophy. Actually, the impersonalists do not merge into the existence of the Supreme Person, but into his personal bodily luster, which is called the Brahmajyoti. Although that Brahmajyoti is not different from his personal body, that sort of oneness, merging into the bodily luster of the personality of Godhead, is not accepted by a pure devotee because the devotees engage in greater pleasure than the so-called pleasure of merging into his existence. The greatest pleasure is to serve the Lord. The greatest pleasure is to serve the Lord. Devotees are always thinking about how to serve him. They are always designing ways and means to serve the Supreme Lord, even in the midst of the greatest obstacles of material existence. The Mayavadis accept the description of the pastimes of the Lord as stories, but actually they are not stories, they are historical facts. Pure devotees accept the narrations of the pastimes of the Lord not as stories, but as absolute truth. The words Mama or Roshani are significant. Devotees are very much attached to glorifying the activities of the Lord, whereas the Mayavadis cannot even think of these activities. According to them, the absolute truth is impersonal, without personal existence. How can there be activity? The impersonalists take the activities mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and other Vedic literatures as fictitious stories, and therefore they interpret them. They interpret them. Sorry. The impersonalists take the activities mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and other Vedic literatures as fictitious stories, and therefore they interpret them most mischievously. They have no idea of the personality of Godhead. They unnecessarily poke their noses into the scripture and interpret it in a decrepit, unnecessarily, I'm sorry, they unnecessarily poke their noses into the scripture and interpret it in a decrepit way in order to mislead the innocent public. The activities of Mayavadi philosophy are very dangerous to the public, and therefore Lord Chaitanya warned us never to hear from any Mayavadi about any scripture. They will spoil the entire process, and the person hearing them will never be able to come to the path of devotional service to attain the highest perfection, or will be able to do so only after a very long time. It is clearly stated by Kapila Muni that bhakti activities or activities in devotional service are transcendental to mukti, or liberation. This is called panchama purushartha. Generally, people engage in the activities of religion, economic development, and sense gratification. And ultimately, they work with an idea that they are going to become one with the Supreme Lord, or mukti. But bhakti is transcendental to all these activities. The Srimad Bhagavatam therefore begins by stating that all kinds of pretentious religiosity is completely eradicated from the Bhagavatam. Ritualistic activities for economic development and sense gratification, and after frustration in sense gratification, the desire to become one with the Supreme Lord are all completely rejected in the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam is especially meant for pure devotees who always engage in Krishna consciousness, in the activities of the Lord, and always glorify these transcendental activities. Pure devotees worship the transcendental activities of the Lord in Vrindavana, Dwarka, and Mathura, as they are narrated in the Srimad Bhagavatam and other Puranas. The Mayavadi philosophers completely reject them as stories, but actually they are great and worshipable subject matters, and thus are relishable only for devotees. That is the difference between a Mayavadi and a pure devotee. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Hare.
The Prabhupada is going at great length to make sure we don't become duped by the Mayavadis. Duped meaning cheated by them, because their narratives are always minus Krishna. They don't consider Krishna to be the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They concoct a whole bunch of speculations, and they act as if They have the truth, and the Vaishnavas are simply what you would call uh, less intelligent uh, persons. But the real less intelligent persons are the Mayavadis. They they don't really accept the existence of Krishna as the supreme personality of Godhead. So that's why it says the Bhagavatam is especially meant for the pure devotees who always engage in Krishna consciousness, in the activities of the Lord, and always glorify these transcendental activities. Pure devotees worship the transcendental activities of the Lord in Vrindavana, Dwarka, and Mathura, as they are narrated in the Srimad Bhagavatam and other Puranas. The Mayavadi philosophers completely reject them as stories, but actually they are great and worshipable subject matters, and thus are relishable only for devotees. That is the difference between a Mayavadi and a pure devotee. Well, we should take Prabhupada's explanation as the gospel truth and not say, well, I got to hear this for myself. I got to listen to what the Mayavadis say to be sure that what Prabhupada's saying is correct. That would be a big mistake. You don't have to listen to what the Mayavadis say. Prabhupada's explaining what they say. Yeah. So there's no reason to go and hear the speculation of the Mayavadis. So he explains what the Mayavadis say. For example, in this purport, which is a long purport, actually, there are many so-called devotees who think that in the conditioned state, we may worship the personality of Godhead, but that ultimately there is no personality. They say that since the absolute truth is impersonal, one cannot imagine a personal form of the impersonal absolute truth for the time being. But as soon as one becomes liberated, the worship stops. That is the theory put forward by the Mayavada philosophy. Okay, so that's on page 368, the second paragraph. Very significant statement. Let me read that again. There are many so-called devotees who think that in the conditioned state, we may worship the personality of Godhead, but that ultimately there is no personality. They say that since the absolute truth is impersonal, one can imagine a personal form of the impersonal absolute truth for the time being. But as soon as one becomes liberated, the worship stops. That is the theory put forward by the Mayavada philosophy. Actually, the impersonalists do not merge into the existence of the Supreme Lord, but into his personal bodily luster, which is called the Brahmajyoti. Although the Brahmajyoti is not different from his personal body, that sort of oneness, merging into the bodily luster of the personality of Godhead, is not accepted by a pure devotee because the devotees engage in greater pleasure than the so-called pleasure of merging into his, meaning Krishna's, existence. The greatest pleasure is to serve the Lord. Devotees are always thinking about how to serve him. They are always designing ways and means to serve the Supreme Lord, even in the midst of the greatest obstacles of material existence. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So we have to really uh, understand how nefarious it is to become a Mayavadi. Why? Because you have to deny the existence of Krishna. You have to think that Krishna is an ordinary person. And you have to think that there's something greater than Krishna. And you have to engage in insulting Krishna on a regular basis. The Mayavadis are the worst insulters of Krishna, worse than the demons. So when we take make an effort to understand what the Mayavadis are saying, you risk never to be able to understand anything about Krishna consciousness. That's how poisonous their explanations are. Now, when somebody hears that, they'll say, "Oh wow, let me read some Mayavad book and see what they're saying." You don't have to do that. Krishna Prabhupada explains what the Mayavadis are saying and debunks it. So you don't have to read a book written by a Mayavadi. Like, for example, it says, there are many so-called devotees who think that in the conditioned state, we may worship the personality of Godhead, but that ultimately there is no personality. They say that since the absolute truth is impersonal, one can imagine a personal form of the impersonal absolute truth for the time being. But as soon as one becomes liberated, the worship stops. That is the theory put forward by the Mayavada philosophy. So you see, Prabhupada is explaining the Mayavad philosophy to us. So we don't have to pick up a book by Mayavadi and read it. And then he says, actually, the impersonalists do not merge into the existence of the Supreme Person, but into his personal bodily luster, which is called the Brahmajyoti. Although that Brahmajyoti is not different from his personal body, that sort of oneness, merging into the bodily luster of the personality Godhead, is not accepted by a pure devotee, because the devotees engage in greater pleasure than the so-called pleasure of merging into his existence. The greatest pleasure is to serve the Lord. Devotees are always thinking about how to serve him. They are always designing ways and means to serve the Supreme Lord, even in the midst of the greatest obstacles of material existence. Okay, so there's urging and merging. So the Mayavadis want to merge, but the devotees are urging to engage in devotional service. The Mayavadis accept the description of the pastimes of the Lord as stories. In other words, they think they're just stories, they're not real Krishna's pastimes. But actually, they're not stories, they're a historical fact. Well, when we believe that what we're reading in the Shastra are historical facts of the activities of the devotees, then and of Krishna, then we become a devotee. This whole idea of what you believe, you have to think about that. We have many different narratives in their world. Now, which one of these narratives do we actually believe? Well, some people say, well, listen, there's so many different narratives. I don't believe any of them. That happens when people don't have a bona fide guru. So they read all the different narratives and all the different speculations about the who is God, who is not God, so forth. And they become disgusted. They say, I don't believe any of it. But genuine devotees spend the time to hear bona fide explanation of who is Krishna and what are his pastimes. And they engage at the same time in devotional service while they're learning these things. If you don't engage in devotional service, you'll not get purified. And if you're not purified, you're not able to understand these pastimes of the Lord. And Krishna obviously is not an ordinary living being. He's a supreme personality of Godhead, and he is invested with all kinds of transcendental powers, powers that are far beyond anything we can imagine. Therefore, he can perform uh, activities that we cannot emulate. Therefore, we have to accept them as the truth. If you can emulate the activities of the Lord, uh, uh, but that's impossible because the Lord's activities are beyond our uh, level of, say, possible understanding and emulation. We can't emulate it that. We can hear about them and uh, acquire uh, knowledge about the Lord's pastime, but we can't emulate them. In other words, imitate them. Just like Pondraka, he wanted to imitate the pastimes of the Lord, so he pasted two artificial arms on his body, right? And then he sent a letter to Krishna and he said, "Why are you?" He said, "You are an imposter. Why are you imitating me?" And so he challenged Krishna to come on a battlefield and fight with him. So Krishna did. And when he saw Pundraka for the first time, he could see that he artificially pasted two arms on his body so he would appear to be like Vishnu. And Krishna just laughed when he saw this. And he threw his Sudarshan chakra and cut off Pundraka's head. So to show that who is the actual supreme personality of Godhead and not this fake Pundraka who pasted two arms on his body so that he would appear to be like Lord Vishnu. There are crazy people like that even today. They didn't just exist in the past. They exist. There are people like that today. They're falsely claiming to be gods and cheating many people and many followers in these false so-called gurus or so-called incarnations of God. Okay, so uh, it says here the greatest pleasure. This is on the end of the second paragraph of Canto 3, chapter 25, and verse number 34. It says, the
greatest pleasure.
Yes, the greatest pleasure. Where is it? The greatest pleasure is to serve the Lord. Devotees are always thinking about how to serve Him. They are always designing ways and means to serve the Supreme Lord, even in the midst of the greatest obstacles of material existence. The Mayavadis accept the description of the pastimes of the Lord as stories, but actually they are not stories, they are historical facts. Pure devotees accept the narrations of the pastimes of the Lord not as stories, but as absolute truth. The words Mama Purushani are significant. Devotees are not very much attached to glorifying the activity. I'm sorry. The devotees are very much attached to glorifying the activities of the Lord, whereas the Mayavadis cannot even think of these activities. According to them, the absolute truth is impersonal. Without personal existence, how can there be activity? The impersonalists take the activities mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and other Vedic literatures as fictitious stories. Look up the word fictitious.
Created.
Something that is
Not true, not real,
right.
imaginary.
Yes, exactly. They're just made up stories, according to the Mayavadis. And therefore they interpret them most mischievously. They have no idea of the personality of Godhead. They unnecessarily poke their noses. I like that statement. Poke their nose into the scripture, uh, and interpret it in a deceptive way in order to mislead the innocent public. So deceptive means you give a false explanation to something to deceive people, to cheat people. The activities of Mayavada philosophy are very dangerous to the public. And therefore, Lord Chaitanya warned us never to hear from any Mayavadi about any scripture. There it is. This is a warning. Never to hear. Let's see, where is it? Yeah. Never to hear from any Mayavadi about any scripture. They will spoil the entire process, and the person hearing them will never be able to come to the path of devotional service to attain the highest perfection, or will be able to do so, or will be able to do so only after a very long time. So he's never, basically saying never understand anything about Krishna, even after a very long time.
Or it takes a very, very long time because it requires a lot of purity.
Okay. Maybe after a very long time. So, why, therefore, should we listen to Mayavad philosophy? But unfortunately, there are there are books with long explanations of Mayavad philosophy. And if we take the time to understand them, we risk never understanding anything about Krishna. Okay. So the next statement is very significant. It says, it is clearly stated by Kapila Muni that bhakti activities or activities in devotional service are transcendental to mukti. This is called panchama purushartha. Generally, people engage in the activities of religion, economic development, and sense gratification, and ultimately they work with an idea that they are going to become one with the Supreme Lord, and they call that mukti. But bhakti is transcendental to all these activities. The Srimad Bhagavatam therefore begins by stating that all kinds of pretentious religiosity is completely eradicated from the Bhagavatam. Ritualistic activities for economic development and sense gratification, and after frustration in sense gratification, the desire to become one with the Supreme Lord are all completely rejected in the Bhagavatam. The Bhagavatam is especially meant for the pure devotees who always engage in Krishna consciousness in the activities of the Lord and always glorify these transcendental activities. Pure devotees worship the transcendental activities of the Lord in Vrindavana, Dwarka, and Mathura, as they are narrated in Srimad Bhagavatam and other Puranas. The Mayavada philosophers completely reject them as stories, but actually they are great and worshipable subject matters, and thus are relishable only for devotees. That is the difference between a Mayavadi and a pure devotee. Well, the Mayavadis, they usually study things like, what's the name of that? They study made up stories, like,
Sharirika Bhashya.
like what do you call it? Well, made up stories, uh, fictional stories. There's fiction and there's nonfiction. So fictional stories are made up stories, and nonfiction are true stories. So the Mayavadis they love to engage in fictional stories, made up stories like Alice in Wonderland, and other things that have been made up by people who have uh, you know a great imagination, and they sometimes even believe those fictional stories as being the truth. However, the devotees accept bona fide statements by bona fide devotees about the transcendental pastimes of the Lord. Now, in order to understand the transcendental pastimes of the Lord, you have to have faith. So when it says that the Lord can expand his body to become uh, giant, and bigger than the biggest, and other times he can become smaller than the smallest. Now that's very difficult for non-devotees to understand. Uh, it's like explaining to a frog in a well the size of the ocean. The frog in the well always measures things in terms of his size, right? He can't imagine the size of the ocean. So one frog went to the ocean and came back and was talking about the size of the ocean to the frog in the well. And the frog in the well could not even imagine how big that was. So he tried to puff up his body and said, "Is this as big as this?" And the other frog said, "No." He said, "Is it as big as this?" And he, took a bigger breath, and eventually he exploded and died. No, there's a certain point where we cannot actually uh, emulate the Lord, and it's a question of what or who you believe at that point. So, if you believe the Mayavadis, they say all these pastimes of the Lord, they're fictitious. They're they're just made up stories. They're not actually factual. But the devotees believe these uh, facts about Krishna. So, who do you believe? That's the fundamental question when it comes to spiritual life. Who do you believe? Like, for example, for the Christians, Jesus was crucified uh, on the cross. He died, and then he resurrected, walked around for 40 days, and then uh, went to heaven to be with his father. Well, do you believe it or you don't believe it, right? You have no way of denying that it happened, and you have no way of uh, validating that it happened other than hearing the narration of other persons, like the apostles of the Lord, uh, and of other people that witnessed the Lord 2,000 years ago. Right? So uh, we have to be uh, credulous. We have to be able to believe these things and put our faith in these statements of the pastimes of the Lord. Now, the pastimes of Jesus are validated by history, but the pastimes of Krishna, you could say, in one sense, they're not validated by history because they happened very, very long time ago. Uh, but there is proof. Like, for example, when it says that Lord built a bridge that went from the India to Lanka. Well, you can see the remnants of that bridge even today. It's underwater, but there is a bridge that has gone underwater, leading from what's the name of that the farthest place? Anyway, from India to Sri Lanka. You know, it's submerged, but it's there.
What is the southmost city? This place, Indian city where it started. Rameshwaram.
Rameshwaram.
Is it Rameshwaram?
What's it? I always got it in my mind.
No.
I think it's Dhanushkodi, right? Dhanushkodi. Transit.
What is it? Rameshwaram? No.
Yeah. So that place is called Dhanushkodi.
Okay. So there is physical proof that that place exists today, right? So it's not actually fictitious. However, the British came and they changed the names of those holy places, right? To deny, and they gave Christian name to those holy places.
They almost say to Adam's Bridge.
Yes, and this is their way of trying to debunk something that is factual. Right? They give a different name to it, their own name.
The name Adam, they choose the right name.
Yeah. Adam was never there. Come on, with it.
It's wrong. They want to connect to the Adam and Eve. Right,
Yeah.
right. So do they think Adam and Eve is also like a fictitious story, or
Who's they? Which group is they? Christians don't believe it's the fictitious.
They don't. They believe in this.
Yeah, I mean Adam and Eve. Yeah, they believe that they actually existed.
Because within all within India, people they are somewhat religious, but they have different opinions. Some people believe in all this, some people totally don't believe.
You talking about in Christianity or just talking about all Indians?
Within India, there is like a different set of people. They call them as a religious people, but they have mixed bag of faith. Like some people think these are all just mythological stories, just to learn something, and some people believe they really happen.
Okay. Yeah, that's an explanation of what it actually is. That's why we're trying to study bona fide descriptions of the Vaishnava acharyas. We're not interested in speculation of people. So, well, you can say, look, there is historical proof that Jesus existed, right? And there are. I mean, today you can go to the Middle East and see the places where Jesus had his pastimes, right? But you can do the same thing for Krishna. You go to
Vrindavan,
Dwarka, which is now submerged.
Dwarka. You go to Dwarka, and you can actually see the submerged place where Krishna had his pastimes. Right? Although it's underwater, but you get your diving clothing on, and you can see the remnants of Dwarka. So
And also it corroborates with the Shastra that says that Dwarka will be submerged after Krishna lives.
okay,
Which
yeah,
also is
yes.
fact. At this point, I think like bhakti versus mukti is very because I think significant, right? Because most of the people, particularly the Mayavad philosophy, they accept bhakti as a path to mukti. For them, bhakti is just a way, a tool, or like a process to eventually get to mukti. Whereas it's important to understand that actually bhakti is transcendental to mukti. Mukti will automatically come with bhakti. So this is very significant point, and I think most people don't understand this because again, it depends on who you hear.
Okay. Well, we hear bona fide shastras. We don't hear the false interpretation of the Mayavadis.
Actually, that's the only thing they talk about.
Which is what?
That is mukti,
The
the
Mayavadis?
liberation.
Really?
Yeah, they only focus on mukti, liberation. They don't even talk about anything else.
Really?
Yeah, that is the fundamental difference.
Until I come to Krishna consciousness, I haven't had this learning of always be in the service to Krishna. I have never heard that service, that true service, always be in the service
Yeah.
and become a servant. It's always pray and get out of this life and birth, get liberated.
Yeah.
That's the only.
That's the main thing, I agree.
And that's what the movies have conveyed, the scriptures have, not the scriptures we sat and studied, but as people were speaking, even
You mean your relatives?
not
Not just
religious.
if you hear any Mayavad,
Yeah.
they only talk about everybody wants liberation, mukti.
Okay.
And to get to mukti, you develop this devotion, but eventually you become one with God. And to the point where you have to even forget your bhakti if you want to become one with God. So they specifically deny bhakti in order to reach the mukti. Whereas we clearly are saying that, and Shastra, according to Bhagavad Gita, Krishna himself, stating that Brahma Bhuta Prasannatma Nasochidina Kanchati Samasarveshu Bhutu Mad Bhaktim Labhati. He's clearly establishing that even after you become Brahman,
It's still.
You are actually, that's when you develop the pure devotional service. Krishna is, clearly stating. But these people, they just, deny those statements or ignore those statements. And then they talk about just this only Purusha, 4 Purusha, Dharma, Artha, Kama, Moksha. So the goal is to get to Moksha. Now you can do all this devotion and everything. And that's why they say, okay, I'm a guru, I will take you. Just become my devotee. And then eventually you will become.
Is moksha something active or
inactive, right? Because that's why they want you to stop devotion also at some point.
So what are the examples? Like which the people who follow Adi Shankaracharya and all that. So are those one of the examples that you are suggesting, that you are mentioning?
He is the primary, he actually, according to what Maharaj and Shastra says, Adi Shankaracharya himself was a devotee.
Right.
But he preached
that we are seeing in real life. Like you have the ones that you're putting, like which we are seeing day-to-day life in India. Because we, even in movies also, I know they believe a lot in mukti, but they also do a lot of devotional service, right? We see
they do devotional service to get to that state.
Yes, and they don't reject the devotional service. Devotional service, like you said before, they use it as one of the biggest tools. Okay, and we see a lot of commonality. Okay, like they still use the form of the god, like Krishna. Okay, and then they do a lot of rituals, a lot of scriptures, and a lot of various things. Okay,
They do.
Yeah.
But eventually they
reject the devotional thing.
Yeah, but they eventually they say that Krishna is non-different from you.
Okay, yeah, that concept is little different away from us. Okay.
No, but that is important, right? That is the
Yeah,
significant
I agree.
piece according to
I agree.
the Vaishnava
I agree.
point. I mean, that's that distinction. That's why I'm just asking us to spend on like this, because I know like some people who debate about like, oh, bhakti is same as mukti, or bhakti will get you to mukti. But what we are hearing here is that bhakti is actually the panchama purushartha, or like the above this four.
Well, there is an explanation. It said that the Mayavadis believe that you take a ladder to reach this high level of spiritual life, and once you reach that high level, you throw away the way you got it, through bhakti.
Okay.
Right.
And that's why all these gurus, they don't state their gurus. Most of them,
Yeah.
they don't give credit to who their guru is. Because for them, it's like, oh, I'm same as my guru now.
Yeah. Okay.
There's no point of my guru anymore.
Well, that's why there's gurus and kangaroos. They make up stories. They're good at making up stories. That's why we study bona fide shastras. They're not made up stories. Of course, they, like Sadhguru, he says, I don't read shastra. I don't read these shastras.
Yeah, I mean, he's another example where like he also worships. There's Shiva, but there's also I know somebody who said like he also worships Krishna, everybody. But eventually his point is, I'm right in front of you. Krishna at one point just walked around, who cares what he says he was also like a yogi or whatever, like me. And that's very significant point because, if somebody is tainted with that philosophy, then automatically their false ego pumps up. And their false ego pumps up to the point where like, I don't need to accept Krishna as the supreme.
Well, that means anybody can be God then.
That's what their philosophy is. I'm here to prove that I'm not God. I'm here to prove that you are God. That's what their philosophy is.
All are.
Yeah, and I think the point is that one who is already in false ego, this is a great philosophy. I mean, it's like I can become everything. I can become powerful. And even with this knowledge,
It's a great deception.
Yeah.
Not a philosophy, it's a philosophy. It's philosophy and philosophy.
Yeah. And people who don't distinguish, I was attracted to that at one point. I attended even Nityananda programs. So, but until we hear this systematically through in this case, actually, the verse itself is clearly stating, Maharaj, it's like pure devotee who's attached to the activities of the devotional service and who are always engages in the service of my lotus feet. That is basically Krishna and Kapila Muni in this case saying, never desire to become one with me.
Can I talk? Is that okay? But that line is actually a little confusing, especially the last line. Desire to become one with me. So that means there is a possibility of becoming one with Krishna, right?
Yeah, that's explained.
But then that is what the same Advaita says, okay? That at one point you become one with them. I mean, that particular line is little confusing.
It further explained here itself that
Bhakti is transcendental to all these activities.
So they become one with the Brahma Jyoti, which is
in the second paragraph,
which is an effulgence of the Lord.
Right.
In a way, that's also Brahman state,
right?
But in that state, there is no devotional service, which is where the actual taste of actual devotion really lies. So that's why you have to see all the scriptures, like, in other scriptures where it is explained that the devotion is millions of times more tastier than liberation, right? But that point is missed.
The point we have that.
The second paragraph, it's written in the middle. Actually, the impersonalists do not merge into the existence of Supreme Person.
You're talking about purport, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm focusing more on the translation.
That's actually not.
That's the correct one.
That's
Same as well.
actually the impersonalists do not merge into the existence of the Supreme Person, but into his personal body luster, which is called Brahmajyoti. Although that Brahmajyoti is not different from his personal body, that sort of oneness merging into the bodily luster of the personality of Godhead is not accepted by the pure devotees. Because the devotee engage in greater pleasure than the so-called pleasure of merging into his existence.
If you become one with the Lord, there's no devotional service. Yeah. So devotees consider that like hellishness, wanting to become one with the Lord. The greatest pleasure is to serve the Lord. Devotees are always thinking about how to serve Him. There are always finding ways and means to serve the Supreme Lord, even in the midst of the greatest obstacles of material existence. Okay, so this statement that the Mayavadis accept the description of pastimes of the Lord as story. But actually, they're not stories, they're historical facts. Okay, so do we have any historical facts of the existence of Krishna? Yeah, you have Dwarka. Dwarka's historical facts that Krishna existed. You have other historical facts also, like the bridge that Krishna built from
Platform built.
from the tip of India to Dwarka, not Dwarka,
To Lanka.
to Lanka. So there are archaeological proofs of the existence of Krishna. It's therefore there's no there's validation of what the Shastra says. So, but somehow or other, people ignore all those things and they make up false narratives that it's all mythology. See, that's how they refer to the pastimes of the Lord as mythology. So there's a big difference between mythology and truth. Mythology is something that's made up. Truth is the truth. The Lord actually existed. He actually had these pastimes. So, like Alice in Wonderland. That's a mythological story, right? It was made up. We know even the person that made it up. But some people they take it as, oh, it's like Alice in Wonderland is. Well, let's see. There's a better example than that. Harry Potter. His Uncle Harry was Harry Potter. Yeah, I mean, kids, they study Harry Potter. Like they get all the books and they study, all the magical things that Harry Potter did, and that's their Shastra.
Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, X-Men, all these.
Yeah,
All these
dinosaurs,
yeah.
all kinds of. Well, I don't know. I don't know if there really existed dinosaurs. There was this one family a long time ago. I used to visit them, and they were nice devotees. And we would have nice programs in their house. So early on, when the kids who were not in school yet, kindergarten and things like that, they're like real devotees, kids. After they went to school, uh, then one day I went to their house and I saw little effigies, a little uh, like I saw dinosaurs all over the house. So then when you put the kids in school, they talked about dinosaurs, and then it just captured the imagination of the kid. And now he had dinosaurs everywhere in the house. And he knew the different names, brontosaurus, this one, that one. And now his whole consciousness was about dinosaurs. It wasn't about Krishna's pastimes, it was about dinosaurs. And it was amazing to see that they became so focused on dinosaurs and not focused like that on Krishna. That happens. That happens. So we have to understand what is mythology and what is the truth. But the Mayavadis say all these histories about Krishna are mythology. They're made up stories. And the devotees believe as gospel truth pastimes of Krishna. Now, how can you validate that Krishna actually existed? Well, how can you validate anything? You have the testament of people who existed in the time of Krishna, and they've left the history and the pastimes of the Lord. That's how you validate. Now, someone will say, well, what about made up things like Alice in Wonderland? Well, we know who made up the story of Alice in Wonderland. Right? And there's no physical proof of the existence of Alice in Wonderland. Right? Okay, so there is proof that Krishna existed 5,000 years ago and engaged in pastimes. And the places where he engaged in pastimes, they're still there. And you have the let's say validation of where he actually engaged in those pastimes, like Vrindavan and Mathura and other places. So we have physical proof of the existence of Krishna. It's not just a made-up story. But do we have physical proof of the existence of Alice in Alice in Wonderland? No. Wonderland is, a fictitious story. But Krishna in Dwarka, that's not a fictitious story. Or Krishna in and activities in not only in Dwarka but in Vrindavan. Vrindavan is still there. We can go and visit it. Although for some years it was hidden, but then it was the five what is their name? Anyway, there was archaeological work that manifested Vrindavan again by the Goswami. The Goswamis were given the purpose to rehabilitate where the pastimes of Lord Krishna took place. And they did it. They went to Vrindavan, where there was only the inhabitants of Vrindavan that had some knowledge that Krishna's pastimes took place in Vrindavan. But then the Goswamis actually engaged in the archaeological research of the pastimes of the Lord. That's why we have knowledge of Vrindavan today, due to the Goswamis. Previously, Vrindavan was a small village in India, and there were the people that lived in Vrindavan area. They knew about the Lord's pastime, but it was not really known all throughout India. Like you can go to South India and talk about Krishna. There are places that have no knowledge at all about Krishna. However, when Lord Chaitanya told his disciples to excavate the pastimes of the Lord in Vrindavan, they actually went and did it to prove that it was not mythological. Okay. So are there any questions?
Are there any questions online?
So the statement, the Mayavadis accept the description of the pastimes of the Lord as story. But actually, they're not story. They're a historical fact. Okay, so when something is a historical fact, there has to be some validation of it. Well, we have the validation. You have Vrindavan, you have Govardhan, you have all these different places where the Lord has pastimes. They still exist. They're not mythological. And the Goswamis, they were given the task of rejuvenating or finding the actual places where Krishna had pastimes and making them places of pilgrimage. And they did it. They actually did it because those places existed and they had just been not really known by the mass of people. The local inhabitants knew about it, but it was not. There was not like real archaeological proof of it. But the Goswamis, they found the archaeological proof of the pastimes of the Lord in Vrindavan, Mathura, and other places. Okay, so we'll stop right there.
Yes.
Yeah. The pure devotees worship the transcendental activities of the Lord in Vrindavana, Dwarka, and Mathura, as they are narrated in the Srimad Bhagavatam and other Puranas. So, if it's narrated in the Srimad Bhagavatam or other Puranas, that means there is validation that these places actually exist. And you can go and visit those places today.
Yeah.
Mm.
So that proves that it's real. If you say, Alice in Wonderland, you can't validate that it existed, right? Yeah, it's fictional. But the stories of Krishna's pastimes and where he had these pastimes, it's all validated. So it's not fictional.
And what's amazing is that the Vedic knowledge has been compiled by under the guidance of or under the purview of only one personality, which is Srila Vyasadeva. And why would he describe
As fiction.
as fiction when he's telling the absolute truth? And he's stating it as absolute truth. So right there, all this, there's no need for another interpretation of another person. We can just rely on.
People can always make stories up, but the statements of the acharyas are not made up stories. And the proof is that there is Vrindavan. It's been there for thousands of years.
Yeah.
And you can see it today. You can go there and see it. All these holy places, Mathura, Vrindavan, so forth. They're not fictional.
Okay, so we'll regroup tomorrow.
Haribo.
And then maybe in the evenings also, when we go for these home programs,
Yes.
we'll see if I can bring my laptop and we can connect for your class time. And then put it
Oh,
on.
okay. So outside people are not here.
Yeah, they're not here.
Yeah.
They're listening.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay. Hare Krishna. We'll see you hopefully in the evening today.